Sigmund Freud writes about the Moses Akhenaten connection. Has your research led you to agree or disagree with this connection?
Oh, yeah, I always do agree. The man was a genius, underrated, had so many more interests going on than just psychology. In fact, his university degree, or his sort of awards or degrees weren't even in psychology. They were in literature, and they were in anthropology and history, his actual awards. Because he had a tremendous interest, almost obsession with Egypt. And don't quote me on this, but I think he actually had been to Egypt and was at one of the digs. But most of his time, because of his career, he couldn't get away. But he not only was fascinated by Egypt, and I have 3 whole chapters on the Sigmund Freud connection in Irish Origins, Volume 2, because he was actually murdered. Sigmund Freud was murdered by the Rothschilds. This has been completely covered up, and I'm following the work of Gerald O'Farrell here. And it's because of his knowledge about what had happened in Egypt. Sigmund Freud and his colleague Carl Abraham were absolutely obsessed. Sigmund Freud's own office, where he did his psychotherapy treatments, were just jam-packed. Literally, you can see photographs of this, of all of these Egyptian sculptures. I think every god that Egypt knew, Sigmund Freud had a little artifact, a little image of it. He was absolutely obsessed. But more than that, as his book Moses and Monotheism, which is a book that's absolutely critical to read for people who are into this, in Moses and Monotheism, it clearly shows that he and Carl Abraham and a man called Immanuel Velikovsky, who's very important in my life. You're talking about comets and celestial disaster. He's the guy. But the thing is that in that book, you discover that his real interest, Freud, was in this Moses Akhenaten connection, as you say. Now, they never quite nailed it that Moses was Akhenaten. They raised the question, and Dr. Carl Abraham believed they were one and the same, as I do. But Sigmund Freud thought it might have been somebody else in the court of Akhenaten, maybe a very, very important advisor, maybe even another relative, maybe Yuya, maybe Tutankhamun, maybe who else was around? What's his name? Aya, Pharaoh Aya, right? Things like that. Or Thothmosis, who was the brother of Akhenaten. So to me, that's much less important. I know that Ralph Ellis also, prefers to think of Thothmosis, this unknown brother, or this shadowy brother figure, usually not very important to the narrative of Akhenaten, was the brother. I'm fine with that because it's not that big of a deal. He was an Atnas king any which way. And the difference between an Akhenaten and his brother in that case, or even in Tutankhamun, I just don't see such a monumental difference. And in any way, since Akhenaten's the more famous personality, I just prefer, almost for convenience, to say, this is a big character and Moses is a big character. I'm going to associate those two until we really have the stiffest evidence that it was somebody else. But even if it was somebody else, it really doesn't matter that much because they're all Atnists. In other words, they're all proto-monotheists. And it's going to be actually a really minor issue at the end of the day. And it's not been completely 100% proven. People have their theories. And even this is a theory. As I said, Sigmund Freud himself just took it theoretically. He wrote interesting things about it, as I've done. And it's just to jog that memory. It's just to get people to realize that if you can now open the door, and Freud has some fantastic things to say that really are questions. He was a very high intellect anyway. So if those questions about this period and about the connection between these two great patriarchs, he discovered that there's too much Egyptian symbolism around Moses for him to be a Jew, or at least to be a Jew in the normal sense. Sigmund Freud is the one who also then speculated about the Hyksos being the original Jews or the original Israelites. Israelite would be a better term to use. Although, as I've proven in my books, you can't leave it there. These terms are much older. Even the term Jew and the term Israelite and the terms Hebrew are far beyond the level, of any of this period, although they turn up again in this period And I think the flaw of a lot of other thinkers is they leave it there. They think they've tracked those three terms to this period of the proto-monotheists, the Atenists. I'm not satisfied with that. I think you need to take them back through Aminism right into Druidism, but that's a whole other, conversation. But back to the point, yes, Freud and his friend, they knew each other. Velikovsky and he were great friends. And he was so obsessed with Moses that he had gone to Rome. I think it's the Uffizi Gallery. Don't quote me on this, but wherever that Michelangelo statue is, of the one where he has these weird peculiar horns, this mighty statue. Sigmund Freud went to Rome specifically 18 times in his life to just stare at that statue, saying, is the founder of Judaism Egyptian? The man was a genius. The man was an open-minded person, the ones we don't have anymore, whose mind was flexible enough to turn all dogma around. And then he wrote this controversial book, and his friends, the Jewish community, begged Sigmund Freud not to write that book for the shitstorm it would create. They begged him on their knees, please don't write Moses and Monotheism. You'll send the Jewish world and the Christian world into absolute, meltdown. The man, being the humanitarian he was, wrote it anyway. But that's not where it ends. Because in the introduction to the book, and that's what people need to read. I'm almost, don't want to even spoil it. But it needs to be said, because I started off by saying that the man was murdered. Well, yes, and that can be verified, because in the beginning of the book, Sigmund Freud clearly tells you that of all the enemies that he had in this area of speculation, in all of his Egyptoid studies, he and Velikovsky and Dr. Karl Abraham, all of that, he said there was no greater enemy on the planet to that kind of research than the Catholic Church and the Jesuits. It's right there, folks. You can go and read it. The man was so brave that he said, I don't even care if the whole Jewish world gets up on its hind legs. They pose far less a threat to me than the Jesuits and the Catholic Church. It is there in black and white. And this is a man who didn't even talk about astrotheology. He's merely scraping off the surface that, and by the way, he's not the first. There's many previous scholars who had made this Akhenaten-Moses connection, just to make that clear. And these men were adding their, gray cells to the matter. And he said that merely doing that alone, merely discovering the proto-monotheist aspect, the Egyptian connection to the Hyksos and to Moses, reconfiguring that whole story of the Exodus, and other things connected to that, like we already said, the identity of Moses, but what else was he into? Just exposing that. Even the Jewish world, for all his vehemence coming at him, he wasn't worried. He said, I can handle that. But the great danger is the Catholic Church. They are the ones, the fifth sect, who have built themselves on that mountain of bones, on that mountain of gnosis we talked about. They have seen themselves as the chief interpreters of the great, whatever needs to be interpreted. We know now what that is. In other words, they are the supreme cult that they felt have inherited the gnosis of all the other previous cults. Now, of course, that's nonsense, but we're talking about their mindset. And the fourth sect, extremely evil sect. But they are saying, no, we don't agree. One of the reasons why these two sects are different is because they said, no, we're not going to throw down our church, our religion, and our, what we're doing with the interpretation of that. And they were Set worshippers, right, as well. So they're going, to hell with what you want, right? We are the inheritors. They look Parthian and Persian on the surface, and later they even look Jewish. But no, these are old Atenists, very hoary, very ancient, and they're already confirmed Set worshippers. And they put the veil of light outside, Aton, a little known, pretty much useless god that was probably worshipped in private. And then they brought Akhenaten, or Akhenaten brought Aton, and I'm the only one to ever point this out, as a shield of light, behind which the private worship, which is known to all the Egyptian scholars, that the pharaonic houses and the high priests and the women had private worship, different gods than they showed to the public. It was the done thing over there. You can read the finest minds on this, but they don't extrapolate and make anything of it. What are you talking about? The whole of Christianity is that shield. You thought they did it in Amanus days and Atanus days, and Mithras and the Persians may have done it. It's still done today by that edifice you call the Christian church. They are comet worshippers. They are set worshippers. People say Satan and Saturn. Yeah, little knowledge. Little knowledge. It's about events, cosmic events that tore up the world, left signs in the sky, and those signs in the sky, they thought they were coming from the gods, and they thought, don't let that comet come back and devour us. We better get altars made. We better light candles. We better do our homework. We never want to see that thing again. It's called fear. And if we had it on our planet, you've seen tsunamis and all, you don't know the half of it. The tsunami is like a baby pool of destructiveness. That's like kids playing sandcastles and kicking them over compared to the comet, whose memory is right back here in every single soul that lives. There would be no New World Order. We talked earlier about being no priesthoods to control your ass. There'd be no masonry. There'd be no NWO. There'd be no deep state. There wouldn't be any dynamics of control at all without that event. And the amnesia, the like, that followed. We talked about the like. The like is a coping mechanism. The like is a defense mechanism. I'm not in touch with reality because nature rose up and hurt us. It's left scars in the root of our conscience. So everything's like. We came up with metaphor. Metaphor is a veil. Metaphor is a coping mechanism. So I'm keeping life at bay. Our language is riddled with metaphor. How long is it going to be? How long do we have to wait? Oh, it's a long road. Jesus, I feel my tongue feels like a desert. Is there anything to drink? Just observe of a day how much metaphor. Oh, she was as cold as ice. No, that guy's face looks like a hatchet. Or we don't even have language without metaphor. I mean, don't think about it. There's no debate about the matter. Without metaphor, there is no life. There is no language. But why is metaphor in language? Why is our language taken on metaphor? Why is it metaphorical? Why does it not just be direct? Well, go around and ask 10 million people that have no answer for you, not even linguists. They don't know about the original trauma, then what they say is largely worthless. They'll just keep analyzing the metaphor and go, oh, that's funny, that's cute, that's the brain. Well, even the brain is split. How did you get the split brain then? With the left side controlling words and language. See, they're still moving at baby paces because the trauma was so great that it left a scar at the back, which is the origin of all cognitive dissonance, all fear and trembling, all cognitive dissonance, all dissociation, and all the things that then those breed. Because the things I just mentioned there are like, branches that then give off more twigs, more fruits, all evil, rotten fruits. The whole mess of it, the whole cocktail of it are dissociations. And then if you're deep fear and trembling, along comes the priest and says, kiss my robe, believe in me, everything's going to be all right. And in their rhetoric of heavens and state, look at religious art. How many beams of light do you need? How much looking up in religious art do you need? And cloud bursts and staring at angels. And that looking up was a source of trauma. So somebody had to put the balm on it. Somebody had to come along and say, no, that wasn't a really evil act. It was this, you're going to heaven. There's a ladder to heaven. Jacob saw a ladder to heaven. Jesus is the son coming to save you. All of this. Once you see it, right? Or Mother Mary, there she is. This huge apparition in the sky. She's the cosmic mother. You have nothing to fear. It was all born out of fear, but a fear that nobody, not even the individual paranoid, or neurotic person who's got these conditions today, you've got to maximize that to universal proportions. The whole world was traumatized by this. And so then the idea of structure, it probably came from the Arctic homeland first, because there you see the northern sky more than you do in other climes. So the first lore was probably up in the Arctic homeland. That's my feeling. And there's proof of this. But you saw the zodiac. And so that regularity of 12 fixed, equal signed, signs, our interpretation of them to make sense of it is making sense of the place that once was just a boiling cauldron, the bottomless pit. The real bottomless pit, the real Hades, the real Anwin, the real Sheol is up there or all around the earth, that blazed with fire, that these bizarre serpentine things rain down acid on the earth and poisonous fumes that just would wipe out armies, wipe out whole cities, and peoples just dropped. perished. They were like burned. It's just like the Bible tells you about, the 10 plagues. Those 10 plagues actually happened. But any fool who thinks, well, it's just a historical anecdote and does not take into consideration the psychic ramifications, I just don't know what to tell you. But luckily, we have an Immanuel Velikovsky who did. We have a Commons Beaumont who did. And I'm their child. I'm their disciple. Right? I'm the one who read their works thoroughly, and I'm trying to keep that alive. The Ragnarok. Unimaginable. So we have the monster. Right. 5 minutes later, you get the hero. You see, because we're making sense of it. We can't let evil be the devourer. We can't say, well, we're just stuck with that. And we can't say we're not healed. We're stuck with our trauma. We are stuck with the trauma, but another part of us sort of, countering that adversity comes out. And you can't understand mythology or the history of the world or any of the scriptures without this. Because even in the earliest stories, going back to Sumeria or Turkey or whatever, they have the evil force, right? The great Tiamat or whatever it might be, and then the hero that has to fight it. And as the story, and all that comes later is that the story just morphs. You got Noah in the Middle East, and you got Nada or Nua in Ireland. And back in the 80s, I had heard that all of the Celtic myths of my country were based in, cosmic events. Didn't know what to make of it. But in the late 80s, I came across that anecdote, and it just sat with me. I didn't believe it or not believe it. And also, it doesn't mean that the tribes back then weren't heroic. Because as I'm trying to point out, there were heroic tribes, but their mythos, what they knew about the world and the cosmos, was infused with everything we're talking about. So of course they had real heroes. This is not to say that you then now jump to the other extreme and say, oh, then all of the mythologies and the histories of peoples are entirely stellar. They are entirely stellar, but they get permeated into different personality types, so to speak, in the different tribes. And then those tribesmen, the heroes of those tribes and the shaman of those tribes and the elders of those tribes, mimic what they've learned from their stories. They become it. So you can't just peel away one and say you're left with another, a bunch of primitive people. No, those people watched the stars. They were stargazers. They took these mythologies very, very seriously, and they brought up their children ritually. I just said Moses had horns in the great statue by Michelangelo. Well, didn't the Native American Indian shaman wear a bison's head with 2 horns? And the stag was very, very important. So you get many of the deities with a stag figure or with stag horns, like Hern and Cernunnos. But those were just degrees within the great ancient Arya. You could be a goat man. So when Freud went to look at the head of Moses, he's working it out. He's saying, well, it's either crescent horns, maybe that's the Selene cult, that's a moon cult. That doesn't quite fit. Let's think of something else. And then he finds out it's old Arya symbolism. The goat man is the initiated one because the goats are the Gets or the Juts or the Yets. This is another name for the Arya. We know it today as Goth, the Gothic people, the Goths. But there's many, many, many different names of these beings. In northern India, they're called the Jats. The Jets. In Denmark, they're known as the Jutes. In Sweden, they're known as the Gets or the Goths. The word transmogrifies as language is passed down through Anglo-Saxon, and you get got, goat, God. The D, the 2 T's turn to D, and you get God. God is the goat god. How many Christians, so when the Christians see Satan's head, they say, the head of Satan with the horns, that's God, mate. Just check up your etymology and your symbolism. God is a word derived from goat. Have a nice day. But the stag might have symbolized a higher grade of the Arya. And a little bit different symbolism. But really, from the generic point of view, goat horns or stag horns represent the same elders, the real Ibaru, right? The ones, the consultants to the Pharaoh. So read my sections on Freud. We're going to be doing more on that down the line. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what this man intuited, and the bravery and the true humanism of the man to defy the Jews and to defy the Orthodoxy and to defy, as he claims, the deadliest force on earth, the Catholic Church. Then, salute, absolute salute to the man for doing that.